So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
It's our weekly happy hour here on Trending, and I was laughing as I was getting ready for the show, coming up the stairs. I'm like, I'm not feeling so happy right now. Let's do this happy hour. Maybe that's you right now. You're just feeling down. I have the solution. I went running back down the stairs with just moments to spare, probably worrying my producers because I wasn't behind my mic yet. But it was all worth it because I went and grabbed some chocolate. Yep. Let's see. How late is it? Eating chocolate. That's okay. Unless you're like really sensitive and won't be able to sleep. That'll probably make you less happy tomorrow. But anyways, it's making my heart happy. We are having chocolate now. What does it for you? You know, I actually was never a chocolate person growing up. It wasn't until like maybe 9 years ago, a friend of mine bought me this like packet, and they actually have the same packets now and again from Trader Joe's around the holidays. She bought it for me for Christmas. It was all these different chocolates, and most of them were really dark chocolates, but each chocolate from around the world told you what it needed to pair with, whether it was a espresso, a particular kind of tea, orange juice. I don't think any chocolate's supposed to be paired with orange juice, but orange chocolate is delightful. Anyways, I digress, but I shall continue. It made me fall in love with chocolate because you'd layer the flavors. You'd layer, let's say, the coffee or the tea, and then let just a small piece of chocolate sit on your palate, and you taste it. You don't chew it. You just feel it, taste it. Anyways, I fell in love with chocolate and dark chocolate. In fact, confession, I will even eat 100% chocolate. So, actually, Lucas is dying here. Okay, 100% chocolate. I will eat it straight by itself. So it's like Montezuma at Trader Joe's. If you're in the checkout aisle and you'll see it there, 100% chocolate. Now the trick is 100% chocolate is delightful with dried fruit, especially the dried mangoes from Trader Joe's. It will change your life. You're welcome. Dried mangoes from Trader Joe's. All the dried fruit is great, but dried mangoes from Trader Joe's with 100% chocolate, whew, amazing. But I actually started then eating it 100%. What is 100% chocolate? Just straight chocolate. They have it. They have it there at Trader Joe's. The Trader Joe's is not sponsor of Trending, by the way, in case you're wondering. But dried fruit, 100% chocolate. Okay, so it's our weekly happy hour here on Trending. As I said, if you're not feeling so happy, grab some chocolate, whatever it might be. I want to talk about a few things today. Everything from the challenges that so many of us face with burnout. And actually, I'm laughing because I think I was feeling burnt out when I came upstairs tonight. And then boom, chocolate helped. I'm not going to give you chocolate as a solution, but it could. So we're going to talk about avoiding burnout. We're also going to talk about, with Father Tim Grumbach from Bishop Alamany High School in Southern California, the Diocese of Los Angeles. We're going to talk about the new Marvel movie, the newest Marvel movie, Eternals. Have you seen it? What do you think? There will be spoilers, so just a heads up. We're also going to talk about a new survey that came out about the happiness of priests. Now, you might think, oh, well, I'm frustrated with the priests because of the scandals. Or you might say, well, what does the priest's happiness have to do with me? Well, I think there's a lot we can do to help address the state of our priests today within our own communities. So I think it's something that's very helpful. Father Tim Grumbach will be here with us to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about how to get stuff done in our life and stay focused. I don't know about you, but I tend to get a little frustrated when I'm not able to get things done. I'm feeling saturated with tasks. I feel like I don't have any time for anything. We're going to talk about solutions for how to overcome that. So, welcome to Trending. I'm Timmerie. You're listening to Relevant Radio. Okay, so let's talk first and foremost about avoiding burnout. How do you avoid burnout? Did you run downstairs and grab a piece of chocolate when you're feeling down tonight, since I mentioned it? Well, that's not normally my go-to, but I was pondering this. Especially after kind of the last year of my own life, we have so many seasons of change in our lives. Seasons where we have to adapt to the new normal. And whether we're in a season of change, transition, or whether we're just being inundated with something from family, from work, a stressful environment that we're in, something that's happened in our own lives, it's easy to experience that burnout and overwhelm. I think, again, one of the big times for this is the seasons of change. Your seasons of change, even just this last year, we had a baby, we ended up with a 2-week-old, found out about a huge job offer, and moved to the Midwest. Huge move, so hard, especially with a new baby, moving away from family and everything. Not what we wanted, but for a season, this is where God has us. You had this job change, not knowing anyone, and it's easy for your body to be like inundated from so many perspectives. You might struggle with your weight, sleep, finding a new routine or any routine at all, with exercise and prayer, cooking, not cooking. I mean, let's be real. If you're a new parent, if you're a recent parent, even just finding time to shower, do the dishes, keeping up with everything, it's easy to burn out and then just start cutting fundamental things out. Now, I'll give you my 4 go-tos, but then I want to get into some information from a really fascinating psychologist Marlene Valter. Marlene Valter is the founder of Anava, and that's a company that provides a resilience training for people who live demanding lives. And so we're going to talk about being resilient in our own lives. But I find it fascinating because 2 of her top 2 things that she talks about in building this resilience and avoiding burnout actually correlates into my top 4 things that I personally do. And no, chocolate is not on the list. To avoid burnout, number 1, burnout does not happen when you spend 30 minutes of silent prayer. Ideally, in a church before the Blessed Sacrament, before our Lord Jesus Christ in the tabernacle. When you truly do take those 30 minutes of silent prayer each day, being open to God speaking to you, speaking to God, allowing for that silence and calmness, breathing and being there, you will not burn out if you're living a sacramental life and engaging in that daily silent prayer. If you can't do it at a church before or after Mass, daily Mass, do it at home before a crucifix. Just make sure that you have the time. Maybe wake up a little earlier. The second thing I do is I try to read a little bit before bed just to clear my mind and transition from the daytime to the nighttime. And it feels nice to at least have read 2 pages or 100 pages that night before I went to bed, whatever it might be. Third is daily exercise. It helps you to avoid burnout. Your goal should be, you should really try to get an hour in a day, but even if you just split it up and you start doing 10, 15-minute increments because that's all you can do, that's fine. And fourth is monthly confession. Things start to boil up in our lives and we start to feel stressed and overwhelmed and build up bad habits because there are things we need to confess. There's luggage that we need to get off of our backs that's oppressing us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Now, I think this is all fascinating to talk about this because as my producer Lucas reminded me, burnout is actually one of the Pope's November intentions. Now, November, heading into Christmas, a lot of people are focusing on end-of-the-year deadlines, getting everything done, preparing for Christmas, heading into the Christmas party season. So let's dive into some really, I think, helpful information that psychologist Marlene Valter has. She, again, I mentioned earlier, is the founder of a company that provides a resilience training for people who live demanding lives, especially work professionals, but anyone who lives a demanding life. Now, her top 2 recommendations for overcoming burnout had to do, 1, with self-regulation that relates to the body, ultimately, and I'm putting that in my words, and 2, was being intentional, and this has to do with the soul. So even though she has no Christian dimension to what she's saying, she's talking about this body-soul dynamic. So number 1 is self-regulation. She talked about how we all know this. When we get stressed, overwhelmed, it could be that we were late to get dinner on, we're eating dinner way too late. It could be something terrible happened at work, someone cut you off on the freeway. It could be an illness within the family or any number of things. The bottom line is we can start to get flooded with our fight or flight hormones. Adrenaline is off the charts. We know a lot of people struggle with adrenal fatigue today, which is this regulation of your stress hormones. Now, this can also cause physical tension in the body. Now, think of it in terms of a zebra. A zebra could be grazing and a lion come up. Right away, fight or flight hormone comes in when the zebra sees the lion. She gives this example in her conversation. Now, and I'm talking about, again, psychologist Marlene Valter, who works a lot with people who are under high pressure, and she talks about building resilience. Well, for the zebra, when the zebra sees the lion, fight or flight hormones kick in. Once the lion's gone, the zebra goes back to grazing, no big deal, everything's fine. But it's different for you and I. When the threat or the stress or whatever it might be is gone, we still have the memories, the emotion, maybe even some sort of associated trauma. It's a mind game that's still existing. Tension is still rising in our bodies. And so what psychologist Marlene Valter says is in these instances of stress and upset, what's impacted is she says that even the part of the brain that shuts down, some of the parts include your judgment, creativity, and systematic decision making. So in other words, when we have a little bit of stress going on in our bodies, when we're experiencing that overwhelm, our judgment's blurred, our creativity's being stymied, and our decision making is impacted as well. In other words, it's almost as if we're under the influence from these stressors that are going on in our lives, leading us to levels of burnout. Now, it's interesting because there's a trend in our culture today to turn to a form of exercise, for example, yoga, which is also a form of spirituality, where a lot of people use it to decompress, de-stress, breathe. A lot of people love the yoga for the stretching benefits as well as the breathing because they feel better doing it. Has a lot to do with yoga. But one of the things that psychologist Marlene Valter mentioned is she said you don't need yoga in order to overcome some of the challenges and self-regulate. What you need is to take 5 to 10 seconds. You can do this as many times a day as you want, and take a deep breath and exhale and scan your body from the top of your head all the way from your head down your face. Do it with me now. Through your shoulders, down your back and spine, through your hips, your pelvis, down your legs, through your knees, down your calves, all the way through your feet. And exhale. And then do it again. Deep breath in. And breathe from head to toe, and your muscles in your body will relax. You can feel physically where you're at. Feel your feet on the ground. You're going to release some of that tension. So what she's talking about is self-regulation. Unfortunately, a lot of people turn to things such as yoga in order to self-regulate because that's the only way they find it. Now, we've talked here on the show about why yoga is problematic, why it's, for example, on a Catholic examination of conscience. In fact, if you're curious about that, I don't have time to dive into it today, but we'll include a link in the show notes for today's show. And Lucas, can you actually post that on social media as well? You can follow me at Timmerie, that's Timmerie, where we talk about yoga and why that's problematic and why the church isn't being ridiculous when they say, hey, you can't be Catholic and practice yoga. So what's fascinating is psychologist Marlene Valter, who works to help build resilience training in people with high capacity, high functioning, stressful jobs, says the first best thing to do is self-regulation. Help self-regulate these fight or flight hormones. Help go back to grazing the pasture like the zebra by just taking a deep breath in and a deep breath out and scanning from head to toe. You can do this 50 times a day. So it's very body oriented. But the second thing she mentions in overcoming the challenges of burnout is having intention. Now, she doesn't talk anything really about faith, but what she's ultimately talking about is that you have a soul and you need to figure out what your purpose is in life. What she says is that this is where the spiritual dimension of you meets. You see, this is where we see that the material elements of our body matter because we have a purpose with God. And so I think that this intention is so important because we have to ask questions such as, why are we here? What am I doing? What's my purpose? We have to understand as people of faith, as Catholics, our first vocation is to holiness, living a holy life. Then our vocation depends upon our state in life. Whether you're single, married, you've taken vows of celibacy and are religious nun or sister. And then we have, for example, our talents. How do our talents fall into being intentional in our life? And using our talents and being careful not to overtax ourselves in certain areas and utilize our gifts to the best of our ability. See, all of this ties back to this whole idea that we have a body and a soul. We need activity, we need prayer, we need purpose. I think that's so important when we talk about burnout, because it's so easy for us to go, well, where am I going to go next? And I'll tell you where you're going to go next, because we're going to talk about how to be more productive, how to get things done and stay focused a little bit more later here on Trending. But first, we're going to take a break. We'll come back with Father Tim Grumbach. We're going to discuss the new Marvel movie Eternals. We will have some spoilers, so if you didn't quite see it yet, well, you can enjoy the spoilers and not worry about it. We're also going to talk about our priests and their happiness. It matters because what we do as laity can actually help with keeping our priests holy and happy. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. I'll be right back during our weekly happy hour with Father Tim Grumbach.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
You're joining us during our weekly happy hour here on Trending. Coming up, I'm going to talk about how to be more productive, stay focused, not get distracted. Come on, that'll make all of us happier. But joining me now is Father Tim Grumbach from Bishop Alemany High School in the Diocese of Los Angeles. He works there as the chaplain working with our high schoolers. Father Tim, the new Marvel movie Eternals is out, and it's created a lot of chatter. I've not seen it, but I want to get your thoughts. I know you have seen it, and spoiler alerts for anyone who's listening. Sorry, not sorry. Part of me is kind of like, okay, are we in this Marvel universe still? Like, do we still want to watch everything Marvel? Is it too much? If you watch the movie and have something to share, a thought about it, give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. There's so much to talk about here, including the fact that there's abortion in part of the story. But let's just kind of get your overall thoughts of the film, Father Tim. You saw it. There's, again, a lot being discussed. Why are so many people talking about the new Marvel film, Eternals?
Well, when I walked away from that movie, I enjoyed it more than a lot of people are saying. A lot of the critiques that are out there, apparently, of the Marvel movies, it's got the lowest ranking or rating for Rotten Tomatoes. And it's definitely a different kind of Marvel movie. But the more I've been thinking about it, the more I think about the characters in it, the less I kind of care about them. And the more I think about the movie, the more I'm like, if this is the direction Marvel is going with the grand scheme of their story, if this is the cosmology they're going to be telling now, it's just the same momentarily exciting, but really ultimately boring pagan myths that humanity's always been telling, but that God has been revealing the opposite of. And so what I mean by that is that we've come a long way from the first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, Iron Man. I think it was 2008, where Tony Stark was building his first Iron Man suit in with a box of scraps in a cave. And now they're telling a cosmology where these godlike figures are creating the heavens and the earth. And they've given us almost a different cosmology, a different story of creation in each of the last 3 or 4 movies or TV series. And they can't seem to make their mind up. And now they're telling us the story of these godlike creatures who are creating the planets and creating the heavens and the earth. And the big shock is it's pretty much to make humans their food or their slaves. And so I really am beginning to ask myself even the question of, is it really worth watching Marvel movies anymore if this is the story they're going to be telling?
One of the things I've noticed over the last few years, and I know Marvel is technically sci-fi, but I've appreciated in the past that it was sci-fi, more so focused on this earth and, Greek gods, stuff like that. I can do, some of that Greek mythology side of things, but it's so space-oriented in other, other dimensions. I cannot stand sci-fi, and I've been reminded of that with the last, 4 or 5 Marvel films. So it was a no for me on the Eternals, but as you mentioned, this perspective of creation, and what's interesting is this whole cosmology and creation account, a lot of this has to do with some of the debacle surrounding abortion. Can you explain a little bit of what that part of the story was?
Yeah, really, you have to go back to the beginning, literally the beginning. The very first thing you see on the screen at the movie are the words "in the beginning," drawing directly from Scripture, from the book of Genesis, the first words, and and the beginning of the Gospel of John as well, as these creation stories. But the creation story that they have to tell is they finally introduce these gods, if you will, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, these celestials. They are these giant creatures. And then the opening crawl, like Star Wars, pretty much, it reveals that in the beginning, before creation, there were these celestials, and then they started to create planets and suns and galaxies and everything that there is, not out of goodness, not out of loneliness, not out of any of the reasons that one might think, but they begin to create the planets pretty much as incubation chambers, as eggs for future celestials to be created. And it's revealed about halfway through the movie that Earth is one of these eggs, is that there's a celestial growing in Earth, and that human beings were placed on Earth because the celestials pretty much feed off of human life force. And so they have placed the Eternals on the planet Earth to protect humans so that they can remain this life force that the celestial growing in the womb of Mother Earth can feed on. And it comes to the point where when the celestial hatches or is born out of the planet Earth will be destroyed and the humans will be destroyed. And when the Eternals figure this out, they rebel against the celestials. And so that's, obviously, spoiler warning, that's the heart of this story of this movie, is the Eternals fighting back against the celestials, trying to give birth to a celestial. And though the language is not used in the movie, and I don't know what was, the screenwriters, what they were exactly going for here, but everyone has recognized that the Eternals, in order to win in this movie, pretty much have to commit an abortion of this celestial baby growing in the earth. And, it begins to make you think, well, if we're going to protect a life or protect many lives, who are we willing to kill? Who are we willing to abort in order to protect the lives that we care about? And that becomes this awful, hideous storyline that really has me asking the question, even though I've invested so much into the story of Marvel and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, are these movies, are these stories really worth following, continuing to follow, if this is the story that they're going to be telling?
And it's subliminal messaging at a certain rate, when you say, Father Tim, like looking at the whole story and the fact that at the heart of the entire Eternal story, they don't mention abortion anywhere. But at the end of the day, it's almost this idea that we're seeing with a lot of our heroes are not heroes today in many of the movies, because they always are taking this attitude in so many storylines that the end justify the means. And in this case, the abortion is what justifies the means of what they're doing.
Yeah, and the most hideous part is, I'm rooting for these Eternals to save the planet Earth by killing this space baby. And how easily that could be translated without people even realizing it. Like, we need to use that language to talk about how disgusting that can be, without realizing it, saying, yeah, I just rooted for the good guys to kill a baby in order to protect life. I'm like, we're not going to be comparing a child in the womb to a celestial space baby living in the planet Earth. But that is, that's what we were rooting for, and that's the language being used in a lot of commentaries about the movie. And it seems ridiculous. It seems outlandish. But it's really horrifying to think that's what I was rooting for.
And some people might say, well, the Eternals either way were going to be fighting to protect, and they would have been killing, their enemy either way. So what's the difference if the enemy was inside the womb versus outside the womb? The whole idea at the heart of this, I know we're talking about a sci-fi fantasy story and monsters and creatures and various celestial beings, but what we're talking about is, again, this attitude of the ends justify the means, and even then, seeing and understanding the innocence of a child and the potential for free will. Grant, this monster being from the film may or may not have free will, but you and I do. That's why the whole conversation that many people have had before of, if you knew Hitler as a child and you knew what he would do, would you kill him or would you encourage an abortion? And the answer has to be no, because he is at that time an innocent child. We don't know that he absolutely would. That's the power, I think, of understanding human free will, that even in the face of the horrible circumstances maybe someone is raised in, they still have the choice to know, love, and serve God, to do what is true, to do what is good, to do what is beautiful, and not accept a path that will be destructive and self-harmful and harmful to others.
Yeah. And there's another thing I'd like to bring up about this movie that is the typical way that these kinds of stories are being told, is the relationships among the heroes and the kinds of relationships that the heroes enter into. And though this goes away from that disturbing image of killing the space baby in the womb of the Earth, there are also some more subtle images that were kind of be placed before us to admire. And that is, one of the heroes is in a same-sex relationship, and it features a same-sex kiss on the screen, which is not the first time we've seen that in, well, I guess you could call it Disney property. There was a Star Wars movie that had something like that, and a lot of people will say, why are you getting so worked up about this? But then you consider the kind of relationships that are placed before us to be admired, to be exemplar. And in this particular relationship, you have one of the Eternals. This is a superhero who's been on Earth for 7,000 years, who's probably been alive for millions of years before that, has fallen in love with another man on Earth, and they've adopted a son, I guess. And so they're a family, and that's actually the only really good image of a family. It's the closest that you get to an image of a family who cares about each other in the whole movie. But no one is willing to question the power dynamics of that relationship, because you have an immortal, almost eternal superhero who has all this power, who is in a relationship with a mortal who's going to die in a fraction of a moment of his lifetime. No one's questioning that, how difficult that will be. But then also just the power he has as a superhero is entering into a relationship with a non-superpowered person. And when there's been so many questions, even within the church, of power dynamics and whether or not those kinds of relationships are appropriate or not, but we're almost demanded to cheer on this relationship. And me just saying how inappropriate it was, I could be bashed for that. For saying, what Marvel just put before us as, what's supposed to be an exemplar relationship is actually something that is, in a subtle way, really dangerous for us to
scandalous,
witness.
manipulative, and this is the problem that we've seen. And not to mention the fact that the reality is these Marvel films are actually for kids. I'm not talking about a 5-year-old kid. Sure, a lot of parents do let their kids watch these types of films because it's supposed to be about superheroes. But I'm talking about kids, we're talking about pre-tweens, high school age, and that's, I think, part of the problem with this agenda of the LGBTQ movement is they push for these scenes in all movies, and especially of late, films that are predominantly for children that are supposed to be 4-quadrant, family-friendly films.
Yeah. And the terrifying thing is that I don't know if it really gives the space to ask the questions that need to be asked after a movie like this, where they have presented a cosmology of, the gods do not love you. They actually want to consume you. What is that supposed to mean for the meaning of your life and what you're called to become and to do in this world? It's presenting to us a life without meaning. And that's one of the most terrifying things that, a story like this can tell.
So that's the movie The Eternals. It's something to think about, but we're talking about this during our weekly happy hour, Father Tim, and I think one of my takes, I was thinking about this, because it is unrelated, but I think related in a certain sense, is, are the films we are watching, do they help us in our day-to-day life? It's one thing if, on occasion you're going to watch a film or a show, and I say on occasion because I think it's important that we have that perspective, to help us unwind, relax, enjoy it with other people. But do the stories we are kind of engaging with, are they agreeable to the state of life we're in, to promoting, a good life, to actually making us think or even learn? And I'm not someone who's a fan of documentaries. And my idea, documentaries, the same thing. I'm not a fan of documentaries. But I think that we need to be looking at films that are inspiring, perhaps educational, rather than things that kind of just leave you walking away and going, well, you know what? I enjoyed it in the moment because of the loud sounds and the effects and the battle of so-called good versus evil. But then as I'm chewing on it a little bit after, I'm not okay with that. And I think that it's important that we are consuming media with a greater sense of pondering and intellectualism at the heart of the story.
Yeah, and if we want to find happiness in the story of Eternals, maybe we have to see it as a bit of a photo negative. It doesn't exactly end on a happy note, the movie, so we won't spoil that. But when it does present our very humanity as being almost meaningless, or we have to create our own meaning, And our human love will be more powerful than those selfish gods that we have to face off against. If that's the story we're being told, we can actually find a ton of happiness and rejoice in that that's not the truth. And that the truth is rather that, God did not create out of loneliness or need, but out of desire and love. God created so that there could be a place where his love is experienced by his creation. So if we see the movies like Eternals and feel lost in the midst of a vast and seemingly indifferent universe, then we can just look to the revealed truth of who God really is. And it'll actually give us that much more joy to know that we do not live in the universe of Eternals. We do not live in the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We live in a universe created by a loving God who wants to pour his love out to let it overflow into creation so that we might share it with him for eternity.
That's Father Tim Grumbach here on Trending with Timmerie, joining us during our weekly happy hour. He's a chaplain at Bishop Alamany High School. And Father Tim, I want to talk about a new study that came out. The study came out for the Center for Applied Research and the Apostolate, and it looks at the current happiness of young priests who were ordained over the last 10 years, especially vast majority of these priests were ordained right around 2017. They had about over 1,000 respondents to this survey, and it addresses happiness, unhappiness among priests. Father Tim, you're actually within the heart of that age range of those who were ordained priests. And in fact, your photo's on the article, in case you didn't know. I was texting like, is this you?
The only reason I saw the article to begin with was because another priest friend of mine, sent me a screenshot of the article and said, "Hey, this kind of looks like you." I'm like, "That is me. That picture's all over the place." And it's actually a picture from a life teen camp that I did when I was a 1-year-old priest. I had been a priest for about a year, and you can tell that the tradining had not happened yet. I've got all these bracelets and rings on, but I hope that you can see in that picture the deepening of my love for the Eucharist. It's a beautiful, simple picture of the moment of consecration. I'm speaking Christ's words into the Eucharistic species. And so my friend sent me that picture, and I was like, well, now I have to read the article because they've used my picture. And it's a powerful article. So much of it is so real about what brings happiness in the priestly life, but also where a lot of men are struggling. And I think they said that the number is something like 4 out of 5 priests who've been ordained for over the last 10 years. And so, I'm right about in the middle of that. I'm about 4.5 years a priest now. About 4 out of those 5 would say that they're happy, which means that 1 out of 5 priests ordained over the last 10 years, some would say that they're unhappy in their ministry. And some would even say that if they had the chance to do it again, that they would not get ordained, and that they would even tell men who are discerning the priesthood not to get ordained themselves. And that's some of the most dramatic responses in the survey that was taken by Cara. And that's a powerful thing. And so this article does a good job, I really think a very good job, of exploring some of the places where priests are happiest in their ministry, but also exploring some of the reasons where they find it most difficult. So did you get a chance to see any of those difficult things?
Yeah, no, looking at it, so some of the good stuff is they talk a lot about how the young priests today did or did not feel well prepared for what they're doing. And this is kind of at the heart of why many of they're showing the young priests are struggling in the survey. The priests commented they feel well prepared to celebrate Mass, to hear confessions, and even for preaching. But a lot of them commented that they do not feel well prepared. Like they don't feel like they're thriving when it comes to the administrative side of things, the leadership side, marital counseling, but especially as well as the pastoral relationships with their own pastor. Because if you don't know, when you're a new and younger priest, like Father Tim has been, you were under another priest for a number of years who was a number of decades older than you. And, it's significant. What they're showing in a lot of these studies is that there's this huge gap between the younger priest that's supposed to be coming in to learn and be mentored. There's a lack of mentorship occurring, and there's no relationship or friendship, so it's leading many of our priests to be extremely lonely. And this kind of falls in, Father Tim, with a trend that we're seeing recently of One, I'm thinking of actually two instances of news I read recently of priests within their 30s who are struggling with pornography addictions, and pretty severe, some of which were very scandalous. I don't even want to get into the details of it. It's so sad. We have to pray for our priests. But I think that this connection of loneliness and lack of mentorship, there's something that can be done about it, not just by our priests, not just by the dioceses, the churches, but also I think from us. And I want to touch on the solutions in just a little bit, but I'd like you to share a little bit of what you thought about these two leading challenges for young priests of loneliness and lack of mentorship.
Right. I've really, to be honest, been blessed to the point of feeling spoiled in my priesthood so far. It doesn't mean that everything's been perfect or that I've handled everything well or that my mentors, my pastors have been perfect. They'd be the first to admit it. Um, but there was quite the age gap between me and my first pastor during the last 4 years at St. Augustine's. I have all the respect in the world for the pastor there at St. Augustine's, and I love what he's doing as a priest. I have tremendous respect for his priesthood, but because he was quite a bit older than I am, and has different visions for ministry in the church, that there were some things that we may not have agreed upon, but we were still able to work together, and I just felt very blessed to work with him and to learn from him. But that's not the case for a lot of men. I was given the space to study the Latin Mass, to at least offer it privately, and Father was never like, you're not allowed to do that. He was always like, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'm glad that you're falling more deeply in love with the Eucharist. And so I was really blessed to have that. But I also have classmates or men who were ordained around the same time as I was, who didn't have that kind of relationship with their pastor. And another thing that really built into the loneliness of young priests that's mentioned in the article is the idea of a clerical hotel, is that the rectory can feel like a hotel more than a home. So that you may have as many as 5 priests living in one rectory, but there's no community. You go to your room and you spend your time there, and you watch your Netflix or whatever it is that you choose as your hobby of distraction. That's a real temptation, and it's a reality. My rectory the last 4 years was built like an apartment building. I was, again, blessed to the point of feeling spoiled of how much space I had to myself. A little kitchenette, and I won't go into too much detail, but it was as the retired bishop that was living with us would say, it really militates against community. So we had to do a lot to build that community intentionally. And so we would get together on Sunday nights and have dinner in one of the apartments and just really catch up on the week if we hadn't seen each other much during that week. And so it was beautiful to see that you could militate against isolation by building that community. But a lot of priests throughout the country are living by themselves and don't have that kind of community. So, in all, I would say, if we're going to look at some solutions, it begins in the seminary. And a lot of guys kind of enter into the seminary and are tempted towards doing what is called submarining. And that's where you go under. You don't really reveal your true self. You protect yourself so that you're not transformed by the experience of seminary. And that comes from good reasons sometimes, where men feel that they can't be themselves because they don't trust the process. Maybe sometimes for good reasons, as we've seen over the decades. But I think the seminary process is changing and transforming so radically over the last even few years since I was ordained, that I think they have more reason to trust the process. But it's still a real temptation to go underneath and hide and say, once I get ordained, everything will be okay. And then they find that things are not okay. And they say, okay, once I get to my next assignment, everything will be okay. And then they find once they get to the assignment, that's not the case. And once I'm a pastor, everything will be okay. And they've never let themselves be transformed by or formed by the experience of being a seminarian or being a priest. And I think that's where a lot of the issues rise from. And the solution is going to come from community with other priests, but also friendships with the laity. That's been the biggest blessing, is to, I keep saying my parents are in the process of moving out to the East Coast to be with the grandkids. But God has been so generous in the different kinds of friendships that have built up where I live now. And that was happening before I moved out here. So I look up and I say, oh, God, I see what you were doing. And so being able to form those friendships and those communities is the greatest solution to a lot of these problems that comes up in this article.
And what reminds me, what you just said too, is how it's easy for everyone, whether you're a priest, whether you're married, whether you're single, to chase happiness. Well, I'll be happy once X happens, or I'll address this, or like change this addiction or bad habit once this happens. And we constantly look at, well, when the next thing happens, I'll change or I'll be happy, whatever it is. And Lucas just commented, how important is happiness to one's vocation? I think that that's an important question, because we all have various trials and pressure that we endure. There's never the perfect situation. Something always happens in life. We think that, we're going to live this perfect little house with this perfect little family, or this situation, or get married at this age. It's never what we exactly hope for, but God can work in that. And last week, Father Simon here during our weekly happy hour was talking about how the root of the word happiness and the root of the word grace in Greek are the same, that happiness is grace. We can live a grace-filled life even in the midst of pain, suffering, challenge, confusion, things not being what we wanted. We can find happiness because a life of grace can be abundant in our lives. We can be living a sacramental life. And I'll come back. I do want to share just a couple things I think the laity can do to help our priests in their happiness. And we're also going to talk about time-blocked calendars here on Trending. That's Father Tim Grumbach. You can follow him on social media. He's tagged especially on my Instagram. I will be right back here on Trending on Relevant Radio. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/forester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
You're listening to Trending with Timmerie during our weekly happy hour. Father Tim Grumbach, the chaplain from Bishop Alemany High School in the Diocese of Los Angeles, is with me. We're talking about happiness among our priests, particularly our young priests who have been ordained within the last 10 years. In fact, Father Tim Grumbach falls within that age range. There was a survey of over 1,000 priests. And what we saw is that 4 in 5 priests are satisfied with priestly life. But some things that came out had to do with a couple big problems: loneliness and lack of mentorship for young priests today. And Father Tim, I want to run this by you because I was really thinking about how this loneliness and lack of mentorship is something that we see across the board in our culture today, not just among our young priests, although it's keenly, I think, felt by priests because of the type of lifestyle that they are called to, the many responsibilities. But I really do believe, and if you're listening now, I hope you'll take this to heart, that our laity can be of great help. And when I say our laity, I'm talking about specifically men of the community. The priests have commented that they feel ill-prepared for the administrative side of work, for the counseling, marital counseling that occurs. Well, this could be helped predominantly by men who have careers and who have worked in the administrative side of their own work environments and experiences, and building those relationships and mentorships with our young priests. If you're a man in your parish, retired or not retired, pull a young priest under your wing, build a relationship with him, help him. And, if he needs to run ideas about marital counseling by you, if he needs to talk about, being a leader among, his parish staff, these are things that so many of our professional men in the community, I think, could be a huge help with. And it can also build not just mentorship, but friendship to help with the loneliness occurring today. Father Tim, what do you think? I think we lost Father Tim. I was talking to him just before he came on, and he was saying, he said, I think that, yes, he agreed. What's happening, the men of our parish and Our Lady can help. And I think that this is a very serious thing for us to consider, that male mentorship, professional male mentorship for our priests would make a world of difference today for what they're facing when it comes to loneliness, isolation, need for help when it comes to marital counseling. In fact, I have a dear priest friend of ours who's been a priest for years, and he'll come over to our house and he would talk to us about, okay, I have this situation with a couple, help me understand better what's going on in their situation and solutions you've seen that could be helpful for helping me in terms of how to counsel them in a faith-filled perspective, but also practically. So I think that these are things that are helpful for people to understand within our parishes to help our young priests in overcoming this growing loneliness, isolation, and the lack of mentorship that they're experiencing as new priests. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio during our weekly happy hour. I wanted to unpack, I think, a very important topic today during our happy hour, and that has to do with schedule. Do you have a schedule? Do you keep your schedule? Or do you just have it all in your head and say, okay, I have all these things to get done, I have all day, and hopefully I'll get it all done by the end of the day? Well, I remember when I was working in campus ministry, I was working with college students. One of the requirements that we expected with the college students was that they had a time-blocked calendar. And part of their mentorship with the college students was that they actually had to show that they had a time-blocked calendar and that they were working through their time-blocked calendar to get homework done, to get exercise in, to make sure, they were having good social engagements, that there was a balance in terms of everything they needed to do, how much homework they had, and what time they were setting aside. And I remember those students who really took this seriously and took the time and tried to live by it, they thrived. And even if, let's say someone had ADD, ADHD, who was working as well, had a lot on their plate, they were able to structure their time. And even if they struggled with focus, even if they had too much on their plate, they were able to prioritize and focus because they knew what they were supposed to be doing and when. And it's funny because this has been trending in places such as TikTok, helping to encourage people to have a time-blocked calendar. So what a time-blocked calendar would look like is, let's say I look at a calendar and I have from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. I would set aside and block out my calendar of what the day would look like. So let's say from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., that's going to be prayer, family time, breakfast, getting ready, kind of like having like these 4 goals or these 4 main ideas within those 4 hours. But then let's say from 9 to noon, I have 3 hours. Well, that's going to be work. Maybe you need to be a little bit more specific. Maybe you're studying for a project management certificate and that takes part of your day. Maybe you're going to put project management certificate in. You have an hour blocked out, let's say for lunch, or half an hour. You have a half an hour where you go to mass in the middle of the day. You have your time blocked calendar so that you understood what you had to do and when. What it does is it reorganizes and orients your life. And I think this is helpful, especially in a world where a lot of people are actually still working remotely. And even if you aren't working remotely, I think it's helpful whether you're working professionally, you're working from home, you're a stay-at-home mom. It's helpful to not have this attitude, because I feel this when I'm home all day, because I work remotely. And, you have everything from the laundry to get done, from this email that needs to be sent. And it's easy to have this attitude that, okay, just everything has to be done today. The house has to get clean. The dishes have to be cleaned. Dinner has to be cooked. I have to, call this person. I have this meeting. And you almost have this dump of everything just always has to be done. Versus having the mentality with a time-blocked calendar, you have then the attitude that this has to be done now, rather than everything has to be done all day. So you focus your time, you focus your attention, you also recognize what you do and don't have time for. And it's very easy, I think, today to become inundated and overwhelmed and flustered. Anxiety is on the rise, depression is on the rise. So many even high school students today talk about how stressed and overwhelmed they are. We have some of the most stressed out generations we have ever seen. Kids have these high anxiety levels. And often I think it's because we're taking on too much. When you have a time-blocked calendar, you actually have an idea for what you can say yes to and what you can say no to. In fact, recently I was asked to do something that I knew I didn't have time for, but I felt bad. And so I felt like I needed to say yes. But when I went back and looked at my calendar, if I made that commitment, those couple hours in the middle of the day, they were going to impact my work schedule, and I wasn't going to be able to get my work done while the baby was sleeping. If I didn't get my work done while the baby was sleeping, well, then that meant I was going to be finishing my work when my husband got home from work, when the baby was awake, when I was supposed to be making and eating dinner. And instead, if I looked and it took the time to pay attention to this time-blocked calendar, I know what I could say yes to and what I could say no to. In fact, Jesus Christ has talked about making oaths. In Matthew chapter 5, going down to around verse 30, he actually talks about making oaths. Now, we're talking about making oaths in really big circumstances. In fact, he talks about it right after his discussion on divorce and marriage. But I want to take this from the perspective of our day-to-day schedule. Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no mean no. How can we allow our yes to be yes and our no to mean no if we don't know what we're supposed to be doing and when? If we don't know what our vocation is, if I don't keep in perspective that I need to be making dinner, eating dinner, spending time with my family, visiting with my baby while she's awake, if I'm making all these other commitments because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing when, well, we can't thrive at what our primary vocation is. First, a call to holiness, but then also our state in life, our responsibilities. I'm a wife, I'm a mother. And I think that these time-blocked calendars, they're trending on TikTok and they're successful for people when you look at a lot of the research because it lets us know what we're supposed to be doing and when. It reminds us of who we are, what we have to do, what we need to orient our life toward, what our mission is. And all of that's so simple, and setting aside time to say, okay, this is an hour for cleaning. This is 3 hours to work on this project management certificate. This is 3 hours to work on these emails. Know what you need to do when you need to do it so that your yes can be a yes and you can say no confidently without feeling bad because you can only do so much in life. Have you known a saint? Well, this woman did, and it changed her life and inspired her life-saving work today. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Tuesday, Reggie Littlejohn shares how meeting and working with Saint Mother Teresa in Calcutta inspired her to help save babies in China and fight China's two-child policy. Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.